Shri Radha Krishnaya Namo Namaha. At first, I offer my humble prayers in the lotus feet of Lord Shri Radha Krishna. I also extend warm greetings and respect to all of you. Today, from the scripture Shri Vivekcudamani, composed by Adi Shri Shankaracharya ji, we will be listening chapter number 12. The holy verses are as follows. He who identifies himself with the objective universe, which has been denied by hundreds of shrutis, smritis, and reasonings, experiences misery after misery like a thief, for he does something forbidden. He who has devoted himself to meditation on the reality Brahman and is free from naisance attains to the eternal glory of the Atman. But he who dwells on the unreal is destroyed. That this is so evidenced in the case of one who is not a thief and who is a thief. The sannyasi should give up dwelling on the unreal, which causes bondage, and should always fix his thoughts on the Atman, as I myself am this. For the steadfastness in Brahman, through the realization of one's identity with it, gives rise to bliss and thoroughly removes the misery born of naisance which one experiences. The dwelling on external objects will only intensify its fruits, namely furthering evil propensities which grow worse and worse. Knowing this through discrimination, one should avoid external objects and constantly apply oneself to meditation on the Atman. When the external world is shut out, the mind is cheerful, and the cheerfulness of the mind brings on the vision of the Paramatman. When it is perfectly realized, the chain of birth and death is broken. Hence, the shutting out of the external world is the stepping stone to liberation. Where is the man who, being learned, able to discriminate the real from the unreal, believing the Vedas as authority, fixing his gaze on the Atman, the supreme reality, and being a seeker after liberation, will, like a child, consciously have recourse to the unreal, which will cause his fall? There is no liberation for one who has attachment to the body and the like, and the liberated man has no identification with the body. The sleeping man is not awake, nor is the waking man asleep, for these two states are contradictory. He is free who, knowing through his mind the self in moving and unmoving objects, and observing it as their substratum, gives up all superimpositions and remains as the absolute and the infinite self. To realize the whole universe as the self is the means of getting rid of bondage. There is nothing higher than identifying the universe with the self. One realizes the state by excluding the objective world through steadfastness in the eternal Atman. How is the exclusion of the objective world possible for one who lives identified with the body, whose mind is attached to the perception of external objects, and who performs various acts for that end? This exclusion should be carefully practiced by sages who have renounced all kinds of duties and actions and objects, who are passionately devoted to the eternal Atman, and who wish to possess an undying bliss. To the sannyasi who has gone through the act of hearing the Shruti passage, calm, self control, and so on, prescribes samadhi for realizing the identity of the universe with the self. Even wise men cannot suddenly destroy egoism after it has once become strong, barring those who are perfectly calm through the nirvikalpa samadhi. Desires are verily the effect of innumerable births. The projecting power, through the aid of the veiling power, connects a man with the siren of an egoistic idea and distracts him through the attributes of that. It is extremely difficult to conquer the projecting power unless the veiling power is perfectly rooted out, and that covering over the Atman naturally vanishes when the subject is perfectly distinguished from the objects, like milk from water. But the victory is undoubtedly free from obstacle when there is no oscillation of the mind due to the unreal sense objects. Perfect discrimination brought on by direct realization distinguishes the true nature of the subject from that of the object and breaks the bond of delusion created by Maya, and there is no more transmigration of one who has been freed from this. The knowledge of the identity of the Jiva and Brahman entirely consumes the impenetrable forest of avidya or nascence. For one who has realized the state of oneness, is there any seed left for future transmigration? The veil that hides truth vanishes only when the reality is fully realized. The destruction of false knowledge and the cessation of misery brought about by its distracting influence. These three are observed in the case of a rope when its real nature is fully known. Therefore, the wise man should know the real nature of things for the breaking of his bonds. Like iron manifesting as sparks through contact with fire, the buddhi manifests itself as knower and known through the inherence of Brahman. As these two, knower and known, the effects of the buddhi are observed to be unreal in the case of delusion, dream, and fancy. Similarly, the modifications of the Prakriti from egoism down to the body and all sense objects are also unreal. Their unreality is verily due to their being subject to change every moment, but the Atman never changes. The Supreme Self is ever of the nature of eternal, indivisible knowledge, one without a second, the witness of the Buddhi, and the rest, distinct from the gross and subtle, the implied meaning of the term and idea I, the embodiment of inward, eternal bliss. The wise man, discriminating thus the real and the unreal, ascertaining the truth through his illuminative insight and realizing his own self, which is knowledge absolute, gets rid of the obstructions and directly attains peace. When the Atman, the one without a second, is realized by means of the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, then the heart's knot of ignorance is totally destroyed. Such imaginations as thou, I, or this take place through the defects of the buddhi. But when the Paramatman, the Absolute, the one without a second, manifests itself in samadhi, all such imaginations are dissolved for the aspirant through the realization of the truth of Brahman. The sannyasi in calm, self-control, perfectly retiring from the sense world, forbearing and devoting himself to the practice of samadhi, always reflects on his own self, being the self of the whole universe, destroying completely by this means the imaginations which are due to the gloom of ignorance. He lives blissfully as Brahman, free from action and the oscillations of the mind. Those alone are free from the bondage of transmigration who, attaining samadhi, have merged the objective world, the sense organs, the mind, nay, the very ego in the Atman, the knowledge absolute, and none else, but dabble in second-hand talks. Through the diversity of the supervening conditions, a man is apt to think of himself as also full of diversity. But with the removal of these, he is again his own self, the immutable. Therefore, the wise man should ever devote himself to the practice of Nirvikalpa Samadhi for the dissolution of the upadhis. The man who is attached to the real becomes real through his one-pointed devotion, just as the cockroach thinking intently on the Brahmara or transform into a Brahmara or Brahmakita. Just as the cockroach, giving up the attachment to all other actions, thinks intently on Brahmakita and becomes transformed into that worm, exactly in the same manner, the yogi meditating on the truth of the Paramatman attains to it through his one-pointed devotion to that. The truth of the Paramatman is extremely subtle and cannot be reached by the gross outgoing tendency of the mind. It is only accessible to the noble souls with perfectly pure minds by means of samadhi, brought on by an extraordinary fineness of the mental state. As gold purified by thorough heating on the fire gives up its impurities and attains to its own luster, so the mind, through meditation, gives up its impurities of sattva, rajas, and tamas and attains to the reality of Brahman. When the mind, thus purified by constant practice, is merged in Brahman, then samadhi passes on from the savikalp to the nirvikalp stage and leads directly to the realization of the bliss of Brahman, the one without a second. Thus concludes chapter number 12 from the scripture Shri Vivekcudamani. Thank you for listening. Shri Radha Krishnai Namo Namaha.